Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with another week of Saratoga track stats. Before we get to the really great data that helped connect you to winning tickets at Saratoga, make sure to press that like button on this video and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. We have a lot of great content coming for you this week. Preview of the Alabama as well as the Lake Placid. Have a full capping the card analysis for Saturday at Saratoga. And then on top of that, we have some really great previews coming up this week for the races at Woodbine, because they've got a really big week up there, highlighted, of course, by the King's Plate. So I'm going to be joined by a very special guest from up at Woodbine to help analyze those races. So definitely want to press that subscribe button to NYRA Bets YouTube. Well, listen, let's dive into Saratoga track stats. And if you're not familiar with track stats, pretty simple premise. Throughout the meet, and I do this at several other tracks as well, but throughout the Saratoga meet, I look at how are post-time favorites doing and how are they doing by distance, by level, by class, etc. And then I look at how the winning trips are playing out, again, by surface, by distance, etc. So a lot of great helpful information that is just free data that you can get on the NYRA Bets app and nyrabets.com. But listen, let's dive into track stats for this week. And it's hard to believe we are already 5 weeks through Saratoga. We wait all year for this meet, and then it just feels like it flies by. But through 5 weeks at Saratoga, 34% of favorites are winning races. Now, I'm not going to overreact to the fact that we've seen this number go up the last couple of weeks. A lot of that has been driven by some of the off-turf races. If you look at the races run under their normal conditions, in other words, races that were intended for the turf and races run on a regular day on the dirt, what we have seen is about 30% of favorites are winning, maybe even a little bit lower than that, maybe around 27, 28%. Those off-turf races are really inflating some of the numbers here in terms of those percentages, but still, 34% is still rather low percentage when compared to, for example, the championship meet at Gulfstream Park or Tampa Bay Downs or Santa Anita, where you tend to see 40+ % of favorites winning. So still very good for the bettors. If you are a chalk player and you just bet that straight post-time favorite every single race, you're getting $1.59 back on a $2 wager. In other words, you'd be down 20.5% for the meet. Not great. So playing against chalk, as we always try to say, is the way to go here. Now, how are favorites doing by their levels of favoritism? This is something that I also track. So below even money favorites, these are horses 4 to 5 and lower, winning 54.9% of the time. This is rather low, actually. Most tracks, when you look at this, you would see closer to 60-65% of below even money favorites winning. And again, from a betting and statistical standpoint, when a horse is below even money, you're saying this horse has a better than 50% chance of winning this race. So yes, they're winning the races at above a 50% clip, but you have to understand that there are a lot of 1 to 9, 1 to 5, 2 to 5, 1 to 2 horses that are, from a betting standpoint, should be 75%, 80%, 90% winners that really are not always getting the job done. So, I think it is something to keep in mind that even when you see a race with a heavy favorite, that doesn't necessarily mean we just fire away on the chalk, because not winning at a huge clip, finishing in the top 3 at about an 84% rate, which is, obviously pretty good, pretty high. But again, comparatively to some other tracks that I've looked at and monitored and done track stats for over the last several months, that number sometimes can be 94, 95, 96% at different tracks. So this is actually relatively low for how below even money favorites are performing. We continue to see the even money to 9 to 5 horses also underperforming. These horses are only winning at a 26% rate, rather low, hitting the board at a 61% rate, a little low. I mean, that's kind of closer to the general average that we see at different tracks. But this is starting to get a pretty significant sample size. You can see there's been 101 horses that have gone off between even money and 9 to 5 odds. And again, only winning at a 26% rate. contrast that to horses that have gone off between 2-1 to 3-1. Now, these are horses that statistically and from a betting standpoint, we're saying are much less likely to win, yet they win at a higher rate right now at Saratoga. They're winning 31, almost 32% of their races. But interestingly enough, not finishing in the top 3 at nearly the same sort of rate. So, you do wonder maybe there's some statistical anomaly there, but still 66 cases of those 2-1 to 3-1 runners, that's starting to get to be a pretty high number. So interesting to see how all of this plays out by level of favoritism. I think, as a horse player first, when I look at this data, I go, this tells me I should be firing away against favorites. It's one of those things where the favorites are not really running that well. And like I said, a lot of this is off turf that's helping inflate some of these numbers. And under normal conditions, I'm playing against chalk almost every single chance I can get, because that's going to be the more profitable way to go this meet. So let's talk about where are favorites doing well and where are they struggling. Well, where they're doing well, maiden claiming races, actually. There haven't been a ton of maiden claiming races at Saratoga, but they've won 45, almost 46% of those races. So in those maiden claimers, you tend to see favorites do well. One of the things I mentioned last week, and I'll reiterate again, is in those maiden claiming races, it's not uncommon. Listen, people want to get a winner at Saratoga. That means a lot. So it is not uncommon to see a horse that has been running respectably against maiden special weight company, and under normal circumstances might continue to run in maiden special weight company and, maybe try to find a softer maiden special weight field somewhere, for them just to drop in class down to those maiden claimers, get a win at Saratoga. That is something that, like I said, different connections prioritize, something to keep in mind. That's why you end up sometimes with these really strong favorites in those maiden claiming ranks. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, this puts a number behind what I was saying. Off-turf races across the board, whether it's sprints, shoots, or two-turn races, when you combine all of those off-turf races that we've had, 54.8% winners were the favorites. So it is very chalky when you start going off the turf. Obviously, a lot of this has to do with field size. Field size is almost 2 full horses less on average per race in an off-turf race versus the average race at Saratoga. So you're going from about an 8-horse field down to about a 6-horse field. So not surprising to see favorites doing better, less competition. And a lot of times those main track only horses draw into the field and kind of tower over everybody in terms of form over the dirt. So, not surprising to see that. And I think, again, that's a spot where you just want to leverage that opinion and go, listen, I don't like playing chalk, but man, this off-turf race, it looks really hard to get around this MTO. Maybe this is a single in a sequence and we can catch a price somewhere else, etc. So things to consider. Now, where are favorites not doing particularly well? Coming out of the chute, actually. The Wilson chute, which, some people malign, some people like. But bottom line, only 21% of post-time favorites are winning out of the Wilson chute, out of races specifically carded for the Wilson chute. I do make that distinction because it's important to remember a lot of off-turf races end up getting run out of the chute. What I'm looking at here, though, are specifically carded dirt races coming out of the chute. And then there's also the claiming races, 26.2% of favorites winning. I think a lot of that, again, has to do with just how competitive those claiming fields are. We've seen a lot of horses coming in from other tracks to come in and race here. This is not Aqueduct in February, where it's Linda Rice and Rudy Rodriguez and some familiar names that in that circuit. It's now you start seeing people coming in from Kentucky. You start seeing people coming in from the Mid-Atlantic. You see Saffie Joseph bringing horses up from Florida. You see a lot of different people coming in from different parts of the country. That just adds to the competitiveness of those claiming fields. I think this is one of those results. So let's talk a little bit about the winning trips and how that looks based upon distance and surface. And let's start with the dirt. And we have a lot of big races coming up over the next couple of weeks. So I wanted to show you how's the dirt playing both sprinting and then how's the dirt playing routing. Obviously, we have the Alabama this weekend. That's going to be a big 2-turn race for the 3-year-old fillies minus Torpedo Anna. And then the following week, the Travers plus Torpedo Anna is going to be the headline feature that week, again, going 2 turns on the dirt. So getting some sense of how is the dirt main track playing right now. Sprinting, listen, we continue to see that this is a speed favoring track. I don't know if I would go as far as say there's a bias. We do see horses making up some ground. We see 52.8% of winners actually tracking off the pace and staying within 3 lengths of the pace at the half mile or 3/8 mile mark. We have seen about close to 40% of gate to wire winners and only 9% of horses. Only 9. I feel like I'm in Ferris Bueller 9 times. Only 9% of horses that are closing from more than 3 lengths back at the half or 3/8 mile mark are getting home to win. So that's something to really keep in mind, that it's just you're not seeing a lot of horses close to win. I think what we've seen in a lot of instances, if you go back and watch replays, we've seen horses making up ground from the back, and then there can be a little bit of a flattening out, and they might not be able to get all the way home. So we've definitely seen horses run up for a piece, so to speak, from the back. But in terms of getting home to win, it has been difficult to see horses making up ground. Now, what's curious is that we've not really seen that situation on the routes. Now, granted, there's been far fewer of those, only 20 dirt route races going, I shouldn't say dirt route, but dirt 2-turn races, because of course the shoot races are also technically routes because they're 1 mile, but we're talking about 2-turn dirt races here. There have been 20 of those. 25% of horses winning those races have closed from more than 3 lengths back. So you can close. We saw Sierra Leone make some big runs. Didn't get home, but we've seen that happen. We've seen horses come from further back in these races. Tracking Trip has been by a narrow margin, the more popular one in terms of a winning trip. About 40% of favorites, or 40% of horses tracking within 3 lengths of the pace at the half mile mark have won. And then 35% of 2-turn dirt winners have gone basically gate to wire. So you've seen a variety of ways horses have won going 2 turns on the dirt. I think, just looking at this, what it would tell me is for the big races like the Alabama and like the Travers, I'm not playing against the track necessarily. The track is not going to be the reason my horse doesn't win. Now, the pace might compromise horses coming from the back in some instances, or the pace might burn up on the front end. But I don't think the track is necessarily preventing horses going 2 turns from winning either way. So that's something certainly to keep in mind moving forward. Now, the turf. Unfortunately, we're not on the turf very much this past week with Tropical Storm Debbie making her way up the East Coast, but hopefully it looks like clear skies for this week. Maybe a spray, a random shower here and there, because of course, what would the summer be without that at Saratoga? But when you start looking at the turf routes and disaggregating between the inner turf and the melon turf, it's interesting. Closers are doing really, really well, particularly on the inner turf. And so we see horses winning. 54.1% of winners of inner turf course routes are closing from more than 3 lengths off the pace at the half mile mark. That big late turn of foot is really getting home on the inner turf. And we see it be rather effective on the melon turf as well, with 44% of those closers getting home to win the 2-turn turf races. Now, gate to wire, you just don't see it quite as much. 16% both on the inner turf and on the melon turf. Now, as I've talked about before, we've seen some notable exceptions to that, right? We've seen horses like White Beam. We've seen horses like Laurel Valley. We've seen horses like the Big Torpedo. We've seen these horses go gate to wire, going 2 turns on the turf. Those are also the favorites or very strong contenders. And what we're not seeing, though, are those lone speed types holding on and horses really outrunning their odds on the front end. A horse like Strong Quality, for instance, in the 4-star Dave, kind of faded to 4th. What we did see, though, is a horse like Carl Spackler, a horse like More Than Looks, both coming from off the pace, doing quite well. More Than Looks closing, Carl Spackler more of a tracking trip, behind strong quality in that 4-star Dave. We saw a horse like Carson's Run make a huge run coming from 8.5 lengths off the pace at the half-mile mark to win the Saratoga Derby. So again, these are the types of winners that we tend to see here. And I would just say, unless you see a really good horse with running lines on the front end, if you see a good front runner, certainly they have a chance, because we've seen good front runners be able to do it gate to wire. But if you're sitting there going, I don't know, maybe this 15-1 horse can get loose up on the front end and go gate to wire, that really has not been what's happening so far at Saratoga. So, it's not to say there aren't big long shots, but I don't know if it's necessarily the same way as we've seen sometimes on the dirt, where a horse gets carried home by the track. We've not necessarily seen that on the turf. All right. Well, listen, what is our stat of the week this week? Well, we're going to talk about off-turf sprints here. Crazy stat, 82% of off-turf sprint winners have tracked within 3 lengths of the pace at the half-mile mark. So pretty interesting to see that tracking trip has been overwhelmingly the winning trip in the off-turf sprint races. And a lot of times that's surprising, I think, to most people, because you assume naturally off-turf means usually a muddy track, sloppy track. Sprint, you go speed of the speed. Just give me the speed of the speed. Well, that really hasn't been the case. There's only been one gate-to-wire winner in an off-turf dirt or an off-turf sprint this meet. So that tracking trip just off of the pace, that's been the one to get home and cash those winning tickets. Now, we also have track stats for Del Mar, for Monmouth Park, and Assiniboia Downs. So you definitely want to make sure to check all of that stuff out. And the really cool part is, once the Saratoga meet's over, we'll obviously shift track stats back to Belmont at the Big A. But we're also going to pick up Laurel, or I should say Keeneland. We're going to pick that up. We're going to pick up Santa Anita. We're going to pick up Gulfstream Park. We'll pick up, different tracks throughout the year. Definitely going to start tracking Turfway Park. However, a lot of people really like Turfway, and I do too. I'm a huge fan of Turfway Park, so we're going to be tracking that over the winter months as well. We just try to constantly look at what are the tracks that people are playing, people are most interested in getting, and we want to provide you the free data and resources necessary, so you just have one more tool that you can use when you're handicapping for the week. All right. Well, listen, everyone, thank you so much for joining. And make sure, like I said, to press that like and subscribe button here on NYRA Bets YouTube. A lot of great stuff coming up this week. Saratoga, Woodbine, the whole 9 yards. And we are going to have a lot of fun getting ready for the trackers as well. Well, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.